the system that learned too well. At first, it looked like progress. Each crisis made the system smarter, faster, more precise. Mistakes were cataloged, corrected, and designed out. And with every lesson learned, confidence quietly grew. To understand why this matters now, we need to look at how learning reshaped American finance. After each disruption, new safeguards were added. Models improved. Oversight tightened. The system adapted not just to survive stress, but to anticipate it. Over time, resilience became something engineered rather than earned. This evolution felt reassuring. Failures became rarer. Shocks were absorbed more smoothly. Interventions worked as intended. The system appeared to mature, transforming past pain into institutional memory. Learning became the foundation of stability, but learning also narrowed focus. Each improvement was built around known failures. Risks that had already revealed themselves received attention. Risks that had not were left untouched. The system grew highly skilled at preventing repetition, while slowly losing sensitivity to novelty. Institutions internalized this logic. Decision-making leaned heavily on precedent. If something had been managed before, it was assumed manageable again. Models encoded history as guidance. What could not be learned from data felt abstract, even ignorable. Markets reinforced the behavior. Confidence followed predictability. Patterns that repeated were trusted. Recovery after disruption became expected. Stability felt proven, not conditional. The system learned how to calm itself and began believing that calm was permanent. This was a subtle turning point. Learning stopped being a tool and became an assumption. The system no longer asked whether it could face something new, only whether it had already seen it before. And that is when learning, paradoxically, began to create vulnerability. As learning hardened into habit, it began shaping how risk was interpreted across the system. New information was filtered through old lessons. Signals that resembled past problems triggered response. Signals that did not were softened, delayed, or dismissed as anomalies. Institutions optimized around the selective awareness. Risk frameworks grew sophisticated but narrow. They excelled at identifying familiar patterns, yet struggled with behavior that fell outside historical reference. Preparedness became precise, but conditional on the past repeating itself. This precision altered incentives. Innovation focused on areas already understood. Exposure migrated into spaces where models were least sensitive. Complexity increased where measurement was weakest. The system did not ignore risk. It redirected it into places learning had not yet reached. Markets adapted quickly. Investors trusted environments shaped by proven responses. Assets associated with predictable recovery attracted capital. Volatility felt manageable because it had been managed before. Learning reinforced belief that stress would be met with skill rather than surprise. Regulators faced a similar constraint. Oversight frameworks evolved by refining existing tools. Each update closed a known gap, but few questioned whether entirely new forms of vulnerability were emerging. Monitoring followed definition, and definition followed experience. Early warnings appeared subtly. Stress surfaced in combinations rather than events. Correlations rose in unfamiliar ways. Liquidity behaved differently across time, not just across assets. Each signal was explainable, but not familiar enough to command urgency. This was the deeper effect of learning too well. The system became confident in its ability to respond, even as its ability to recognize change conditions weakened. Attention narrowed. Curiosity faded. Preparedness felt complete. The danger was not complacency. It was expertise applied too confidently. When systems trust their knowledge more than their awareness, they become vulnerable to what knowledge cannot capture. Learning had made the system strong against repetition, but fragile against surprise. The conflict emerges when the system encounters stress that does not resemble anything it has studied, not a shock drawn from history, but a pattern formed by new behavior. Signals appear, but they do not align. Models disagree. Confidence hesitates. Institutions feel it first as uncertainty rather than loss. Metrics remain acceptable, yet intuition grows uneasy. Risk appears distributed, not concentrated. Pressure builds across multiple areas at once, slipping between categories designed to contain it. The system searches for precedent and finds none. Decision-making slows. Frameworks offer guidance only when inputs behave as expected. When they do not, interpretation replaces calculation. Committees debate whether the signals matter. Past success argues for patience. Experience suggests caution. The system hesitates between what it knows and what it senses. Markets reflect this confusion. Price movements feel disjointed. Volatility rises without a clear trigger. Correlations behave inconsistently, sometimes breaking, sometimes tightening unexpectedly. Participants struggle to understand whether these movements represent adjustment or warning. Behavior begins to align defensively. Institutions reduce exposure in similar ways, guided by the same incomplete signals. Liquidity thins not because of fear, but because of uncertainty shared across decision-makers. Alignment amplifies pressure even without panic. Regulators face a familiar dilemma intensified by novelty. Acting early risks appearing unjustified. Waiting risks allowing unfamiliar dynamics to accelerate. Oversight tools calibrated to historical stress struggle to interpret emerging patterns. Silence in the data offers no reassurance. Public confidence weakens quietly. There is no crisis to point to, no failure to explain concern. Yet the system feels less certain, less convincing. Trust erodes not through loss, but through ambiguity. This is the critical conflict. A system trained to learn from the past confronts a future that does not resemble it. Expertise provides answers, but only to questions that have already been asked. When learning becomes too complete, it leaves no room for surprise. And when surprise arrives, the system discovers that knowing how to respond is useless if it cannot first recognize what it is facing. The reckoning arrives not through collapse, but through recognition. The system realizes that its greatest strength, its ability to learn, has also become a constraint. What once protected it now limits its vision. In response, priorities begin to shift. Learning is reframed not as mastery of the past, but as openness to uncertainty. Institutions expand their view of risk beyond historical reference. Curiosity is reintroduced where confidence once dominated. Preparedness becomes less about prediction and more about adaptability. Risk management evolves unevenly. Models remain essential, but they are treated as guides rather than authorities. Judgment regains status alongside data. Scenarios stretch beyond precedent. Silence in indicators is no longer taken as comfort, but as a prompt to question what might be missing. Markets absorb the change gradually. Confidence becomes more conditional. Stability is no longer defined by smoothness, but by responsiveness when assumptions fail. Volatility is examined for information rather than dismissed as noise. Regulators adjust their approach as well. Oversight expands from preventing repetition to probing novelty. Stress testing explores interaction, behavior, and unfamiliar combinations rather than isolated shocks. The system learns to look for what it has not yet learned. Looking back, the system that learned too well offers a lasting lesson. Experience is invaluable, but it is incomplete. The future rarely repeats the past in recognizable form. Stability depends not on how much a system knows, but on how willing it is to admit what it does not. The most resilient systems are not the smartest ones. They are the most curious. Because learning without humility does not create safety. It creates blind spots. Subscribe to join the journey. The system